Good evening, and a very warm welcome, everyone. My name is Barbara Kertai, and I'm part of the team here at World Vision that fundraises for our Global Childhood Rescue Fund, which many of you support. Tonight, I'm calling in from Hungary, and my amazing crew is live from Australia. And I'd love to know, where are you joining from? So while we wait for everyone to connect, would you take a second to say hello and let us know where you're joining from, which you can do in the comment section just below. While you do that, just a bit of housekeeping. So the comment section below is where you can ask questions directly from our guest. I will start by asking about her experience, and then I'll open up the session for your questions as well. So please just type your questions at any time during the conversation. Okay. Our topic tonight is witnessing the world's most dangerous places. Childhood Rescue is the global fund that equips World Vision to conduct life-saving work in such places. Tonight, we wanted to give you a glimpse of what life is like there. Our guest is someone who has a vast experience of living and working in some of the world's most dangerous contexts, such as Niger, Afghanistan, and the Middle East. Her name is Lindsay Gladding, and she is the Director of Fragile and Humanitarian Operations at World Vision Canada. Hi, Lindsay. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Barbara. Thanks for having me tonight.
Lindsay, I refer to the countries you've lived in as some of the world's most dangerous places. What makes them dangerous? How are they different from, say, Europe or your homeland, Canada?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, when we think of dangerous places, we may automatically think of war-torn countries like Syria or Yemen, but we're also really concerned for children and families living in dangerous places like San Pedro Sula in Honduras. This neighborhood has one of the highest rates of gang violence anywhere in the world. If you've been watching the news recently, you may know that they've been hit by 2 hurricanes, record-breaking storms just in the last 2 weeks. And so these are dangerous places that are also really susceptible to disasters that make life really difficult for children. And so children in these dangerous places, they face some of the most difficult places to grow up. And so, they're often forced to flee from their homes, in many cases, multiple times. Their access to education may not exist at all or is repeatedly interrupted. They have limited access to healthcare, which means that many of them don't even make it to their 5th birthday. And the risks of early marriage and child labor are unfortunately all too common. So these are really the places where it's most difficult for organizations, charities like World Vision to work. But they're also very much the places that we're called to serve in our hopes of reaching the most vulnerable children on our planet.
Yeah. You mentioned that you lived in the Middle East earlier, and when we think of the Middle East, most of us, definitely those of us in Europe, would be aware of the crisis in Syria. You have a first-hand experience of just encountering how that the war affected the lives of children and their families. Would you say a few words about that?
Yeah, so my 2-year-old son at the time and I moved to Beirut just at the end of 2010. So we moved to Lebanon so that I could take up the post of emergency director for World Vision's national office there. We moved in Lebanon in part so that I could learn more about how World Vision does development work. So I'd spent my career up to that point deploying to emergencies around the world and hadn't really had an opportunity to spend more than a few months in one country really learning what long-term development looks like. What none of us could have predicted was that 6 months later I would be standing at the border in northern Lebanon as violent conflict broke out in Syria.
So when it first broke out, probably everyone thought that those families who came over thought that they could go home quite early, relatively soon. You guys probably also equipped for a humanitarian, like an emergency response. What happened as time went on and you realized that they were not about to return?
Yeah, so I mean, I can really vividly remember standing at the border in March of 2011. We would see vehicles pull up to the Syrian side of the border, and women and children get out with whatever little belongings they could carry to cross the border into safety. And I remember speaking with women as they crossed, with really full confidence that this would be a short-term
Mm.
stay, that they were just coming here to be safe, for a few weeks, expected that violence would stop, and they would be able to return home. Of course, we know now that that was a very optimistic dream that for most people has yet to be realized. In the initial days, weeks, and even months of our response, we were really just caught up in responding to emergency needs that were before us. So, World Vision was attempting to ensure that people had access to shelter, to food, really basic services. Again, really expecting that it would be a few months at most. And so it really wasn't until I was starting to get ready to return home to Canada after about 9 months into our response that I really, began to realize that this was going to be a much longer conflict than really any of us had anticipated. And so we know now that, I mean, we're closing in on a decade of violent conflict in Syria, cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Millions of people, Syrian people, have been displaced from their home. But I also, I take comfort in knowing that the World Vision staff that I have met that work in our Syria operation, the staff that work for our partner organizations, I mean, they truly are some of the most dedicated and resilient people that I know, and they haven't lost hope, for a peace in their country. And so, I mean, that gives me hope also that that this war won't last forever.
And the children, the refugee children who you met, probably told you about experiences that no child should really experience. So here you are with a little girl. What were some of their concerns, or their dreams that they shared with you that actually was quite surprising, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, this picture for me really, I mean, it makes me pause a little bit, because I mean, children are children everywhere, and so this young girl and I mean, we didn't share the same language. My Arabic is not, certainly not fluent. I could ask her her name and how she was doing, but that was about the extent of it. But we spent some time blowing bubbles, and it was just, there's such joy in simple things. And I think one of my other really favorite interactions that I had with a young Syrian boy, his name is Mohammed. I was meeting with his family to learn more about their situation in Lebanon. They had fled from Syria more than a year ago at the time that I was talking with them. In the course of our conversation, Mohammed, who was probably about 10 years old, ducked into the tent. He sat, shyly behind his mom. I could tell that he was, he wanted to talk to her, say something, but he was, being polite and not trying to interrupt us. So I started our conversation, asked him what his name was, and for him to join in the talk with us. And he was very quick and excited to say that he was just coming back from his first day at school. He'd been out of the classroom for more than a year. And honestly, he was just like bursting with excitement. And so I asked him what his favorite subjects were at school. And so he told me that, it was math and geography and French and science. I was like, oh, wait a minute, French. This is fantastic. I can speak French. So I asked him, how he was doing in French. He was like, no, man, like, it was the first day. I needed to give him some time before he could be fluent. And so, we talked a little bit, and then I asked him, like, why are you so excited to go to school? I mean, when I talked to my son, who's now 12, he's not so excited about school as Muhammad was. And he told me that he wanted to be a teacher. And when war broke out in Syria and his family was displaced from their home, he thought that hope and that dream was over. And the day that I talked to him, his first day back at school, he had hoped that was going to happen again for him. And so for me, I mean, that's the power of childhood rescue. That's the power of the work that World Vision is able to do, because of regular people that support our efforts. we're able to help kids like Muhammad. We set up child-friendly spaces, accelerated learning programs, to really help kids catch up, for the missed school that they have experienced, and help them to, enroll in the school system, in this case in Lebanon, so that, Muhammad could have his dream again. It seems cliche, but it is very much real for him.
Yeah, it must have been, unimaginable for those families to leave everything behind, the education that they had, the careers, the wealth, their homes. Yeah, what did you hear? How did they process those sacrifices that they left behind?
Yeah, I think what I have experienced with, talking and meeting with families that have fled from the war in Syria, and also, from conflicts in other places in the world. It's just that, life changes so quickly. And we're seeing that again in Honduras right now, in Central America with these storms. People in these fragile, dangerous places, they're living their lives trying to make life better for themselves and for their children. But because of the fragile nature of the countries that they live in, because of, violent conflict and insecurity, life changes, and everything that they've built is in an instant gone. And I think through all of that, though, again, what I am consistently reminded of is that people are resilient. We pick up, we live, and that education in particular is so critical, and is the first thing that families and children ask for when we're running humanitarian responses. Sure, food, water, yes, but really it's school, it's education, that's most important.
It's just like the story of that little girl you told me about, the one who actually would not give up her school, right? Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I had an opportunity to meet a family who stayed in Syria for about 4 years into the conflict. And they told me they were living under ISIS control, who we know, were committed significant atrocities in this conflict. But they stayed in Syria in part so that the young woman that I could talk to, she was a young teenager, could finish her high school diploma. They were committed to ensuring to see that through. They didn't want her to lose that opportunity to finish high school. And so they were telling me about the situation of their life in Syria, living under constant fear of violence, of bombing. And so, at some point I just had to ask, why was that? How could going to school be worth that risk? And ultimately, the girl looked at me and asked, without an education, would I be sitting here talking to her? Would I have the opportunities I've had in my life if I hadn't had the opportunity to go to school? Of course, my answer was no. Education, it allows us such great opportunity to open so many doors that without it, our lives are significantly altered. So
wow. Yeah.
education is it.
Speaking of girls, Afghanistan is one of the most dangerous places, especially for women and girls. World Vision has a range of activities. We operate mobile clinics in parts of Afghanistan to help women receive medical care during and after their pregnancy. And you were in fact overseeing such projects, and that was not long after you returned from maternity leave, right? Oh, there you are. Could you tell us where you are and who you met and what stories you heard there?
Sure. So this photo was taken on Mother's Day a number of years ago. It was the first Mother's Day that I was away from my own son. But I had the really incredible opportunity to be in Herat city in northwestern Afghanistan, where World Vision works, and the opportunity to visit the Herat maternity hospital. So it was a really fitting place to be on Mother's Day. And we know that, women in Afghanistan face some of the worst conditions of women anywhere in the world. They face some of the highest lifetime risks of maternal mortality. and the shortest life expectancy of almost any other country in the world. And so as I, on that Mother's Day when I was in this hospital, I walked past room after room filled with, 10, 15, 20 women. When we came up to the hospital, the men who had family members, women inside, were sitting on the lawn in front of the hospital. This was really a women's only domain. And as I walked through the delivery room in the hospital, women in all various stages of labor, and as I got to the end of at the end of the room, I had an opportunity to have a conversation with a woman named Anita. She was 15 years old. She had just delivered her first baby, a girl. Over the course of the conversation, she asked me, I asked her what she had named her baby, and so she told me she'd named her. The woman's name was Aisha. The baby, she told me she'd named her Anita. And so she asked me if I liked the name that she had given her daughter, and of course I said yes. And I asked her what she hoped for Anita's future. And so her first response was that, she hoped that Anita would have good relations with her father. And so, in a culture where the division of sexes is so significant and where men truly control most aspects of women's lives, this couldn't have been a more important aspiration. But it was really the second response that caught me off guard. She told me that she hoped Anita could be a doctor. And I mean, it's perhaps cliche. I said that before, for us to, hope that our children, are doctors or lawyers. And for me, this is such an incredible aspiration for this, 15-year-old girl to dream for her daughter in a place like Afghanistan. I'm not sure how in a place where, there seems so little reason to hope when the odds are very much stacked against her. Did Aisha have the strength or even the courage to dream that kind of dream for her baby? And so, as we left the hospital that day, as we drove away, like I really felt like we'd left sacred ground. There was new life being brought into the world, and the dream of an almost impossible future being invested in a young girl's life. It's an experience that and a story that still brings goosebumps to me. And I often think about Anita and Aisha and wonder what their life is like now.
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah. Our audience may not be so familiar with the life trajectory of a baby girl in Afghanistan. Just you have mentioned that life expectancy would be very short, but for what other reasons is this like an almost impossible dream for this little girl?
Yeah, so Afghanistan, has experienced decades of conflict. Today, it's still recognized as one of the deadliest crises in the world. So it doesn't make the headlines certainly as much as it did 10 years ago. But it is very much still in conflict and a dangerous place for children to grow up. It's a place where multiple generations now of girls have grown up knowing only the terror and uncertainty, honestly, that comes with violent conflict, with forced displacement from their homes, and really deep gender inequality, that continues to severely impact opportunities for young girls and women in Afghanistan. So we know that, girls born in Afghanistan face significant challenges to education, where education for girls is available. It's really difficult for girls to stay in school beyond the sixth grade. Without, education beyond that, the opportunities are very limited. And part of the reason that girls are, drop out of school is that about 1 in 3 girls in Afghanistan experience early and forced child marriage. That means they're married well before reaching adulthood, really taking away any opportunity for continued education or professional employment. And so it's a context in a country where access to education, water, really basic services are lacking, but there are signs of hope too. More girls than at any other time in the last few decades in Afghanistan are going to school, and we see more women beginning to complete education and enter the workforce. And World Vision in particular, we've been working with community leaders to help postpone child marriages and are seeing success in that. And so it's certainly changes like that help keep hope, and give me, some faith that, Aisha and Anita, might be able to be fulfilling this dream that they had for her life.
Thank you. Thanks, Lindsay.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should now turn to some of the questions from our audience, if that's all right.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with Lucia, who asks, how can the international community, organizations, diplomatic relationships, etc., help reduce violence, hunger, corruption, and conflict in these places?
Yeah, so I think that like the work that World Vision does in places like Afghanistan, in other dangerous places around the world, it really is rooted in working with communities, and so it is helping people to to find meaningful employment, income generating opportunities, so that they're not reliant on humanitarian assistance to provide food and water for their families, and it is making commitments to start trying to address some of the root causes of conflict, making sure I've talked a lot about education and the importance of that for children, but again, schools provide an opportunity for kids to be safe, an opportunity for children to learn about conflict resolution, about how to build peaceful societies. And so it is those kinds of small changes that ultimately do ripple and help us to create more secure futures. I think the other thing that's really important and that's relevant now is really trying to respond to the effects of climate change, helping communities to adapt to the new normal that we're living in. We have communities that have faced multiple years of drought, more than they've ever seen before, and so World Vision works to help build. It helps planting things like drought-resistant seeds, irrigation, making sure again that the families can sustain themselves and continue to grow.
Mm-hmm. Let me now take the reverse side of the same question, really. Sonia is asking, how can I help the people who live there, who serve there, and the journalists who try to let the outside world know about all this?
Yeah, I think in part you're doing it right now by listening into this live stream. I think it's important for us to know what's happening in the world. It's easy to sort of be comfortable in our homes and our communities, and turn a blind eye to the experience of children and families in places that are much more difficult to live than where we do. I think again, making contributions to childhood rescue is certainly a great opportunity to be part of the work that we do in these places to support children, and talking about it with friends and family, and asking what they can, if they are willing to support, and be aware of what's happening as well.
Feel free to drop more questions into the box, by the way. We have time for a handful more. So let me just proceed. The next question, Gregory is asking, do World Vision staff have any protection from armed attacks?
So World Vision really relies on acceptance within communities for our security. And so, in a place probably most relevant to talk about is Afghanistan, since I have been speaking about that this evening. The communities that we work with, we've spent more than a decade working in. They value the work that we're doing in partnership with them. And so that does provide us with a level of protection because they see value in us staying and us being able to continue to operate, to continue to do the life-saving work that we do. And so that does, it seems perhaps naive, but we have been able to continue to work even in some of the most difficult places because we have that acceptance by the communities with which we work, and it is also because we work primarily with local staff, and so these are people who live and have grown up in these communities, who know and are able to provide leadership and support for us to continue to our work in a safe way.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one more question. Oh, is it possible to sponsor a child from dangerous places like these?
Yeah, so in the most difficult places we work, so places like South Sudan, Somalia, and Afghanistan that we've talked about today, in these contexts, it's not possible to sponsor a child through World Vision, and in large part that's because these places are volatile. These are places where children often are displaced from their home multiple times, and so with World Vision, when we sponsor when we sponsor children, when we sponsor communities, these are places that are relatively stable, where we know that children and families are going to stay for 10, 15 years. That's just not the context in the places that we work with childhood rescue. Children are on the move and are not in the same place. It would be difficult for us to keep track and to know that communities are going to stay stable. I think that the real value that we have with childhood rescue is that it enables us to respond to the needs of communities as they evolve. And so we have an approach to programs that really allows us to adapt, to provide life-saving programs when we need to support communities, when in times where things become a bit more stable, to address some of the root causes of conflict and fragility in those communities, and to really help communities to thrive. And so childhood rescue helps us to stay in communities that are facing conflict and violence in a way that even the sponsorship is a different model.
Yeah, it makes sense. If families are on the move or they're being threatened and displaced, yeah, absolutely makes a lot of sense. All right. I think the last question we have is how is the well-being of children in these dangerous places?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think in some of the most difficult places where we work, children's lives are threatened. They're threatened every day. We know that children have faced an incredible toll on their lives. In the conflict in Syria, thousands of children have been killed. These are places where children are living on the edge. I think what is really concerning us right now as well is the impacts of COVID-19. We're all facing that in our own communities. But it's really exacerbated the needs in the communities that we work in dangerous places. Children, families that had really tenuous income to begin with, with lockdowns and closures, that small amount of income that they were receiving, even that has been threatened. And so we're seeing more children being forced to work. We're seeing more children experiencing violence in their home. And so it's a challenging time in our history. There are more people displaced from their home than there ever has been since the end of World War II. There's lots of work ahead of us. But I think back to that young girl whose photo you saw, her and I blowing bubbles. Children are resilient. They are playful. They have a boundless hope, for their futures. And so I think it's easy to lose hope and to think that it's a lost cause, and like, what possibly can I as one person do to make a difference? But I've seen it. I've seen the difference that childhood rescue makes in communities. I've seen the difference that it makes in the lives of individual children like Mohammed. And so I think for me, it really is balancing this tension between despair at the state of the world, and hope that this can't be, we can't be okay with the way things are, and we do have an opportunity to make a difference, and we just need to act on it.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, Lindsay, for your experience and the inspiring words as well. I think we have run out of questions. Thank you for all of you who submitted questions, and thank you for all of you who have joined us tonight on this conversation. Thanks, Lindsay. Have a good evening.
Thanks very much.
Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Bye.